that group of students is important. This is especially so because of, as you mentioned, Dr. Mari, the quarter system that we're in. Any health-related interruption to high school courses will have a substantial impact and a greater impact than it would at any other level in our system. The recommendation to continue distance learning for this group, just make sure that those students in grades 9 through 12 will be ensured continuity throughout the second quarter of the school year. Overall, we've heard a lot of good feedback about distance learning and a lot of good things about what our high school teachers are doing with our students, and that it's been a positive experience for many. But at the same time, as we heard tonight and as we're all aware, not all students are having the success we would expect. So there are going to be two key changes to distance learning in high school for second quarter, and Dr. Matheson is going to detail those changes.
Thank you, Dr. Beckner. A couple of the changes that we are looking at for the high school experience in the distance learning. One is we're going to increase the class length from 55 minutes to 70 minutes. This should allow teachers the time to provide support and intervention during each class period to best meet the needs of all learners, particularly those who are struggling. In addition to increasing the length of each period, high schools will continue to have learning support blocks each Wednesday, and that's to provide additional assistance for students. Also, they'll be continuing their office hours at the end of each day, which is also another way to get help for students when needed. There are also a big change for our recommendation coming forward for second quarter is the possibility of in-person supports and interventions. We know that some students, as Dr. Beckner, Dr. Marty, and many of us have said, and even hearing from our patrons tonight, we know that some of our students are struggling academically. We also know that there are some that need access to social emotional support. We also have students that require specific services. So currently we're developing plans that will provide opportunities to receive in-person intervention and support at school for certain students, so we can ensure students' unique needs are met. We also will share the details of these plans in the coming weeks. There's a lot to consider as we're looking at bringing in certain groups of students, and our teams are working to develop what those will be.
Thank you. Questions for any of us, and particularly Dr. Matheson, Dr. Beckner?
I'll start. Can you expand on what specific identified needs are?
Mr. Todd, that's a great question, and that's something that we're working on. You have our student services teams, SAT, as well as working with some of the high school principals. Some of the areas, and I want to say possibly because there's a lot that has to be digested in how we can implement these pieces. Some could possibly be bringing in some students with special needs, also with students that are at risk, students with multiple failing grades potentially, students who are struggling academically. Also, we do partner with some of we have our counselors, our school counselors, district counselors, social workers to also provide supports for students who are struggling with possible social emotional pieces, as well as maybe having opportunities for students to come in, and if there are some counseling pieces that could be helpful, that we do work with Child Service Fund, such as Youth in Need, Preferred Family, different things like that. Those are for extreme cases. What we're really looking at is some significant tier 3 interventions, possibly having those tier 3 interventions being in the building. But we would need to make sure that we create objective guidelines around those and who would be available to be able to get those supports, and also be working with, not only that, the in-person piece is one part of this. I want to also note that we have the distance learning pieces that are also going to help, that are different. And that increasing that time frame during the school day from 55 minutes to 70 minutes should be able to give also academic supports for students as we've increased that time for that specific reason.
Dr. Beck, you might want to just clarify, or one of you, that students at the high school will be taking, rather than 4 classes, they'll be taking 3. So it'll be a bit of a less academic load for our students, correct, Dr. Beckner?
That's correct. So typically, in most of our schools, they would have in a semester 7 classes and an academic lab. So given that we are in the situation where we're in, students took 4 classes during first quarter, and they will take 3 classes during second quarter. By not having a full 90-minute academic lab multiple times per week, that allows us to extend each class period. And that's where the additional, I think we had even a citizen statement that said, what are they going to do now that there's only 3 classes? Well, we are expanding the length of those classes, and that will allow our teachers to provide more targeted support for students who may be struggling in that particular class. So instead of having to say, come see me at learning support time, they will be able to build some of that support directly into the time that that student is in the class with the teacher, helping us then address more of the student needs. We will still have a 50-minute learning support block on Wednesdays, so students can still get that additional support in high school. But that, Dr. Marty, to your point, is there's a sort of opportunity in the schedule right now, and because we don't want to just have an academic lab, we want to provide really the support within the classroom. I know we really believe that our classroom teachers are the best people to provide that support when it's academic needs, in that particular content area. So by expanding the classes from 55 to 70 minutes, we provide additional time for teachers to provide that intervention in the class.
One of the questions I oftentimes get from parents, they say, well, my child needs support. So we really need to emphasize our teachers have office hours. They have that 50-minute block on Wednesday, the extended time. And to me, it's not much different than if the kids were in person. Our teachers are available. So we really got to direct our families to take advantage virtually of that support. And our teachers are there for them. I know in the key communicators, one of the teachers was saying they got students lining up on that Wednesday block. And sometimes they do some group things because they may have 3 or 4 students. So, that virtual option is there, and it can be valuable the students, academically. Now, as Dr. Matheson said, there'll be some services that absolutely are necessary coming into the building, obviously to take advantage of some of the agencies we work with, or certainly some of the therapies that some of our students have not had and really do need, as we heard on some of the special education needs. So we need to work with our special school district to get that staff back in our buildings and taking care of needs if necessary, and IEP needs, and also just things that are very important for students, physical and emotional, and certainly physical and academic needs as well.
I think it was maybe Dr. Matheson that mentioned mental health. And this doesn't just apply to high school students, but a lot of our middle school students. We keep hearing the numbers that the average age of students with mental health issues keeps declining. So how are we supporting all of our students with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, as a result of separation from their peers, separation from their teachers, things like that? What are we doing to support those students?
Yeah, we have a lot of work that's been done throughout this summer with professional development for teachers, for our staff members, as well as getting into, because as we're looking at distance learning and how do we make connections, how do we engage kids, how do we build relationships, those are pieces that are difficult, and I think our teachers have done a pretty good job. But yet we do know that there's students who are still not connected with school, that don't feel there's a place in this virtual space is very difficult. We've done a couple things during this period of time. Our school counselors over the summer, and even currently, same with social workers, district counselors, have reached out to families. They make phone calls. They check in on their most at-risk students. Teachers are noticing if there's behaviors that are happening or students aren't coming to school. We're pulling attendance reports. We're checking in on those families and those students to see how they're doing, checking on their well-being, if there's anything that they need, and those types of things. Our principals are taking emails and phone calls if there are students who need help and getting those helps. We've added supports this year at the middle school. Every middle school has a care coordinator position, and that position is a tier 3 intervention to work with some of our most students with most social emotional needs. And those positions, thank you to the board for allowing us to move forward with those. And also we have 3 area care coordinators at the elementary school and looking to hire a 4th one to help out with those supports as well. Every one of those care coordinator positions are a mental health expert. In some way, they either have a counseling background, they could be a psychology background, school psychology background, a social work background. So we've added those positions. Those were recommendations from the mental health task force. And those new people are jumping in and doing everything they can to also reach out to our students. We're trying to make sure that we have a collaborative approach within our department. And that collaborative approach is talking about what's working best and a team approach of meeting the needs of the social emotional pieces for our students. So during this difficult time, I'm really proud of the work that people have done. And yet, if for those that are listening to this message and board members, if you have students or people that are struggling on the social emotional side, please reach out to your principal, reach out to your school counselor, reach out to me, reach out to somebody, because we need to help your child and we need to make sure that they are well. That's a significant piece. I heard that from the patrons, but we'll continue to do that in it. And when we move into the virtual space, that we're already currently in, we move in partially in person, we're also going to need to make sure that we have resources to where our staff are not only helping those that are in person, but we're also making sure we're making a conscious effort and also a significant effort to make sure that we're still reaching out to our students and families are choosing the distance learning plan as well.
Thank you very much for all that. That gives me a little bit more comfort that we have the care coordinators in place to, to reach out to those folks. I know we have our counselors know in a lot of cases which of those students that they see, need more assistance than others. But have we thought about surveying the entire student population at different age levels and just saying, how are you? Is there something we can do to help you? I know we reach out to we keep tabs on the ones that we've labeled as, need that help. But, I'm also concerned about the ones that we think are just stellar kids and there's nothing wrong with them on the surface. But, we unfortunately find out that's not always the case. So I'd be in favor of pushing out some kind of survey to students, not only to find out how they are mentally and emotionally, but how they're doing with learning thus far. Maybe they have some suggestions that we haven't thought of.
And maybe even asking them about their concern about peers.
Yeah.
I think, and then we're doing the same with staff. I mean, we're really promoting the wellness with our staff and having staff look out for one another. I think that's a good suggestion. I think we really need to be conscious of this mental health, social emotional need of everybody, adults and students.
And I would say that's one of the key messages that we heard at the MSBA conference from the Teachers of the Year, as well as the feeling of isolation. And both teachers and students are feeling that sense of isolation in this virtual world. And so there are actually some school districts around the country that are pushing out part of their curriculum is a half hour of required education on their mental health and mindfulness training to help students. And there's been some parent cafes that have taken place and things of that nature to just help people get through this. Because, in some cases, as we've learned with some families, they have to stay virtual. And so that segues into one of my other questions, which has to do with what can we do to help our students connect with their peers, even during a virtual environment. I know that, some kids still get together, or they've got a lot of other friends in the neighborhood, but not all do. And so where are we also in tandem with this and getting some of our extracurricular activities back to help our students re-engage with their peers?
Mike Roth has really been encouraging advisors and working with our principals to, to be communicating, if you are advisor of a drama group or a club, to get those kids together virtually. And So we've heard some, robotics is really going strong, for example, and we've heard, some of the other areas. But I think, Debbie, you're absolutely right. We've got to continually find those social niches for kids. Athletics, I know, people have been critical of the athletic, teams, but that is certainly, as I told you, talking to those students on Saturday, I mean, they are really finding that to be one of their important outlets. But we got to do it beyond athletics. We certainly got to extend that to the fine arts, to clubs, activities, our debate team. I know our debate teams are actually organizing. They're going to do virtual debates, but I mean, we just got to look at every area. And Debbie, absolutely. I think it's something we have to, as SAP members, continue working with our principals. And I think it's happening in some areas and maybe more than we're aware, but we really need to continue pushing that.
If I could jump in, as we talked about after school activities and before school activities, we talked with the principals early on about if your teachers want to offer help sessions, that is something that, typically happened in the middle school after school sessions, some people call them tutoring, to provide those opportunities for teachers if they want to work with kids after school, to, get caught up or, help clarify something they didn't get in class, just like they would stay for after school activities and after school help. We also told our principals that if you think there are clubs that can be done virtually, you can engage staff in those conversations. And if you think it can be done virtually, let's have the club, let's have the after school activity. I know, some of our middle school drama teachers have done some amazing things they did with e-learning, and principals knew that they were going to do some great things as we started this fall. I have not asked every principal, what clubs are running and what activities and how many, but they had that ability based on the activity work that Mike Roth does to have teachers offer after-school clubs and activities.
Yeah, Debbie, a couple of points that I want to bring up about how do we make the connections. One is we did some at the beginning of the year, and they're still being published and created. We have several of them out there now, but we did a parent series working on how to engage in the social emotional piece, mindfulness, those types of things. And those were actually, they've gotten quite a few hits and views, but again, for parents and patrons listening, there are some of those on our website. Also, our care coordinators, counselors, I've even seen principals having lunch bunches and meetings to just check in and hang out with kids. Virtually, they eat lunch together, they're talking to them, and in some ways in a very engaging but relaxed way, getting kids to socially interact with each other. And especially if we have students we know that are struggling with that social interaction, what a cool way to eat food and hang out and talk. And so those are going off. And those are happening, and that's happening in some of our schools and many of our schools actually, and have gone over very well. Those are just some small pieces to give you some information to that. And you also talked about a student survey. Dr. Marty answered most of that, but Aaron Schulte and I, over the last couple of weeks, have been looking into how do we assess our mental wellness of our students and make sure that we have the resources available if we were to do a survey to check on students, to ensure that we have the resources to follow up and follow through with the students as well. And so we're working on a plan for that.
That discussion
was
for years, we just wanted to be able to react to it. Yeah. I'm sorry, was that Christy or somebody came in?
No, it was just me. I do also know that some of our A+ tutors are tutoring virtually, because I've heard from some principals who we set up the process early on because A+ tutors wanted to help kids as they think about their service hours. So that process was established, I don't know, probably in August as to how that would operate.
I'll just, if in this pause, Paul Tandy also was going to just review our communications plan. I think briefly, Paul, if you want to bring that up to the forefront.
Yeah, I can be very brief on it, Dr. Marty. We've covered most of it already. So just a couple things to point out. Obviously, the little yellow stars tonight. If the decision is made to move forward with in-person learning, we'd be prepared then tomorrow to send a notification out to families and staff, FAQs and that sort of thing on the website. We do feel like, since now we have a specific recommendation, if it's approved, we do want to allow those K-8 families just one last time to make sure that we have the correct preference for each of their children. We do anticipate there will be some, once they hear the specific plan, that they may want to change that. So we want to honor that. So next slide. That we'd have a quick turnaround on that, though. We really need them to, let us know very quickly, obviously, if they do want to change last minute. And then we'd move forward with the things we already talked about in terms of putting people into groups and communicating all those schedules and your bus assignments and that sort of thing prior to the second quarter beginning on October 27th. The last thing on the right I did want to mention is, and to your point, Dr. Martyr, earlier, we would continue our weekly metrics and updating our health dashboard and publishing that information. Whether we will continue doing the weekly newsletter out to everyone, it kind of depends on the level of COVID. And if it flattens out, we might not do the newsletter every week, but for now we would. One of the changes is, once we're back in person, we would also begin publishing numbers for every school in terms of positive cases and quarantine numbers by building, so everyone can see that, be very, very transparent about that, obviously maintaining confidentiality for individuals. Then we were thinking, once the second quarter got going, we would do a thought exchange to get feedback. That could be a thought exchange, or it could be more traditional survey. If we want to have it focused more on mental health, we could talk about what that looks like. But that's what we were thinking, is once the second quarter got going, we would be doing that. And that's all I had, Dr. Marty. You're subject to anyone's questions.
Thank you.
I would just make the suggestion that we move up any kind of survey with students to a lot sooner than November.
Yeah, if the focus is strictly mental health, you can do that right now. That was, when we looked in November, we were thinking of once we transition to second quarter to get feedback on how that's going. But if it's focused on the mental health piece, you could do that right now.
I would say do both. I think it's key to really
I agree.
stay engaged with our students and be overly communicative with them, to see how, checking in with them and see how they're doing.
So any other questions on any aspect, going back to Robin's report, or any of the breakdown of the preschool, the K-8, the high school, and any questions on any communication? Here again is the three broken down recommendations, but overall, we're just asking you to approve, basically what is an in-person and virtual teaching and learning plan for the start of the second quarter. I just will say, and this question came up today, I think, from a family, second semester high school schedule will be something we'll continue monitoring, whether that would be a continuation of, whether we would look more then to a virtual campus approach like we are with K-8 starting second quarter, or second semester rather, in January. So, I mean, again, COVID numbers would dictate that. Our desire would be to continue on second semester with the K-8 virtual campus and the in-person for second semester. The high school, hopefully, again, if the numbers improve, and I know we're hearing, strongly desire to get students back at our high school this year, we certainly would hope that might be a possibility at the semester break. Again, with that virtual campus option.
So Dr. Marty, would you, is the intent then that when parents are surveyed at this point, that they're in theory selecting their option for the remainder of the year, but that there may be an opportunity later this year to inquire again on their preference for beginning in January? That we might survey parents again for the second semester?
What we've been telling parents is that we want to really avoid significant staffing changes. So we're asking parents to be very thoughtful and looking for their selection to be for the rest of the school year. However, if there are some significant changes from the students' performance to some issues going on in the family, we would deal with those on an individual basis. what we want to avoid is a significant restaffing, because as you heard tonight, or what we've been hearing, of course, our families concerned about how many teachers their children are going to have in the course of the school year. So we're, some of our children, as we said, will have a new teacher second quarter, and we really not want to have them yet have another teacher at semester break if we could avoid it. But we will certainly deal with those needs on an individual basis. But overall, we really would like the choice they're making now, and we've been pretty clear, I think, in our response to families. And that's why I think we saw a jump in the last week from, virtual kind of in the mid-20s to getting over 30% again, because I think more parents were making the choice, not sure that they wanted their children back. And now we're looking for virtual potentially for the rest of the school year.
But so if the COVID numbers were to improve, or say a vaccine was to come about, not that that's going to be the end all, but if things start improving at the beginning of the year, are you open to the idea of looking at the high school model again and considering more in-person learning?
Definitely. I mean, I think henceforth we'll, as we start second quarter, we'll continually monitoring what's going on, and certainly, if possible, we'd like to get high school kids back in person if the data would allow that. And in that, we would certainly then move to a virtual campus approach for our 9-12 students, as well as an in-person. So again, that would be, I think I'm speaking for my team. I think that's what we'd like to see. I know that certainly we hear from parents that would definitely want their children back for some in-person instruction this year, especially, we heard, I think, from, a parent of a senior. I know they want their children back in person before they depart. So, but again, so much of this will depend on the data and the thresholds that Robin presented.
And I don't want to give anybody false hope, but is it conceivable that we could possibly have high school students back in some fashion before the end of the second quarter?
Well, I'm going to let Kevin respond to this, because yes, I mean, it's the teachers that are teaching the class are teaching virtually, and they have their group of students, but I know, Kevin, there may be some issues with that, potentially, maybe. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
With high school, there are some specific logistical challenges to changing in the middle of the term. One of the reasons that we went to a quarter system to begin with at the high school level was because we need to have a clean break at the end of the term to be able to switch students. Because just practically speaking, if you've already begun a class with one teacher and you have a grade book and you have grades already assigned, and then you change teachers, all of your work is lost and you're starting over with that additional teacher. Now, schools problem solve that with individual students one at a time, but if we were to switch all students, we would have to restaff our schools at that time, which would mean the vast majority of students would end up changing teachers, getting a new schedule in the middle of the quarter, again, having challenges with their grades, and just knowing how important those credits are, and knowing, kids, they need a certain number of credits to graduate. We know they're looking at their post-high school plans, all those sorts of pieces. Switching high school mid-term, regardless of what that term is, and in this case, it's a quarter, creates those logistical challenges where students would really be caught in the lurch and be put in a very difficult situation. So that's why we're very reluctant to switch something in high school in the middle of a term, because we don't want to put children, our high school students, in a really difficult position.
Well, and I wasn't thinking answering that. We still would have to be conscious of the kids that want to stay virtual, is what you're saying, Kevin, right? I mean,
that's exactly what I'm saying. If students go virtual, that means that we have to move teachers virtual. And that also means that we have to, when I say we need to redo their schedules, it's a result of, Dr. Marty, exactly what you just said. It's a result of some of those students are not going to want to return in person. And that means that we would have to pull a certain number of teachers to also teach virtually. And that's why those changes once we get into this next quarter, they become more challenging, only because then it has a domino effect. It's not just changing my schedule, if my schedule changes and I have a different teacher, other students' schedules are changing as well. And so it really would be a result of having to restaff the buildings in the middle of the term.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate all that. I'm just wondering if, since we're only going to have 3 classes for high school students, if there's a group of students, and I know some classes, some science and English and history, there are some classes that are easier to teach virtually, and there are some classes that require more hands-on, more physical involvement. And I just wonder if there's a class or a group of classes that and obviously we'd have to be careful about the equity part of it, but if there's a class or group of classes that we could say the beginning of November, wow, the numbers look fantastic, and so we think we can bring these 100 kids in for one class of a day, one couple of days a week, or whatever the case may be, that particular class might be able to meet, and it might be a way to ease some of our high school students back into the building. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think we certainly understand that desire. Don't want to close the door on it, but also definitely don't want to overpromise on something that logistically we know that we would have challenges delivering on. Even something you just described, we would have to start getting into lots of other logistics conversations around transportation, around just operating our schools, and in particular, if we are going to have, for example, the 8th grade from West Middle at West High, some of those things might have an impact on other areas that we haven't thought of. So certainly appreciate the thought, President Todd, and don't want to close the door, but also certainly don't want to promise, just knowing the logistics that would have to go into something like what you described.
Sure.
So how do you plan to schedule all the students that have needs? Because there's so many of them, and you've done a great job of coming up with a variety of different plans to accommodate needs. Seems to me it's going to be a fairly large portion of the student body that are going to come forth having some type of need. Logistically, how do you work that all out? How do you schedule that?
We're working right now with the high school principals, and we have to prioritize what those needs are. And that's the difficult part. Everybody has needs. We're all individuals, right? So there's certain things that we might need extra help with, and that becomes the difficult. At which level do we say, this is the level at which we can provide supports, and this is the level we think is the greatest need, not just need. There's students and many of our students have needs, but what are the ones that are the greatest need, and which ones do we have the resources to be able to support them and support them effectively in person? There's a lot of needs that students have that we may be able to meet them in this distance learning and virtual plan, with the addition of the 15 extra minutes in the classrooms, with thinking outside the box, with trying to engage students socially as well as academically. But Dr. Sorrentino, you're right. This is the difficult part, is where do we draw and how do we figure out where the most needs, and making sure that we have a system that's in place that's fair, that's equitable, and also that's sustainable for our students as we go forward. And that's something we're working with the high school principals. They know their kids the best. And also working with Dr. Bobby Fleming with special education, and understanding what our needs of our students are when we're talking about their IEPs, and how we can meet some of those specific needs of students with special needs. So that's in progress, is the best thing that I can tell you. And we have to work through those one step at a time to be able to identify the students that would be able to be in for the in-person help. And it was more of an intervention. It would not necessarily be students who are coming in and going through a schedule. It would with the students who are at risk population, maybe students with multiple failing grades, students who are really struggling on the academic side, as approached through our tiered intervention system. And how we would do that would be more of a supervisory role, and possibly having people coming in and working with those students and checking in with them, helping them, finding them tutors, those types of things, they would not be getting their instruction any differently than our students that are going through the distance learning. Now, students who have shifting gears with special education, dependent upon the work that Dr. Fleming's working with our special education administrators as well, that may be different because we are obligated under their IEPs to provide specific services and academic supports. And those are things that we would be working through as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your thoughts and everything that will be done to try to help students. I think of a large portion of the student body that may not fall in this category to get assistance or help, or will not come forth to get it. Students that are very capable, very bright, that can do the work virtually, but maybe are not doing it because they're bored. They feel isolated, they're discouraged, they're depressed. You know, there are a lot of students out there in those categories that are not going to be identified, and they're going to be struggling out there. They're capable students who could do the work. There's no question about it. And I think we're going to miss a lot of them in terms of providing for their needs. And I also feel that parents of kids like that are going to say, gee whiz, you know, you're providing for students who have other needs. My child has these needs that you're not providing for. And I don't know. It just seems that we're going to have such a difference in how we're providing for students that it's not going to be equitable, that they're all not going to get the opportunity to be serviced as we would like for them to be serviced and learn in their best way.
Well, I would, one of the conversations I've had with, I think parents, children themselves have to advocate for themselves. I mean, if they're struggling academically, you know, it's one thing to just, you know, throw in the towel, but, you know, how do we teach kids to advocate? And we know that some children go off to college and sometimes haven't learned that skill and, you know, struggle. So I think it's basically really telling people, if I have a need, I have to advocate, or parents have to advocate with personnel. In the last couple of weeks, when I get emails from parents at all levels, I really try to refer them back to the principal, to a counselor, somebody in that building, rather than come to me. My job is to connect them to the resource. And I think, again, those parents that are struggling right now, we've heard it, whether it's academically, whether it's social, emotional, there's somebody in that building who can help. And we've added resources to help families. So please don't believe that, you know, that we're not concerned. We are concerned. We've heard it, and we're very much wanting to assist. But please reach out to us or advocate so we can begin that process, rather than you know, let us know well into the term that my child's not connecting. And then we have to get our teachers certainly to be responsible and be alert, and that's what we're trying to do. Don't let a child suddenly just disappear. You know, we need to be responsible. So it's everybody really working in the best interest of children. And Sam, appreciate your passion, and we feel the same way. We don't want children to fall between the cracks. Some of that honestly has happened, you know, when we're in person, we sometimes have children that aren't taking advantage, and you know, but so the onus is on everybody, the parents, the students themselves, and our staff and our administrators to really look out for all people here and be really attentive to, especially that social, emotional, mental health need that we're very concerned about. It's real. We know that there's a lot of anxiety and depression out there in society right now as a whole.
That spurs another question that I had with identifying learning disabilities with our students at this time, especially some that might be in the virtual setting. And how is that happening? How are we identifying? Because we don't want to lose young children and have a learning disability or dyslexia go on for years because we're in a virtual environment. It wasn't caught. What's being done to help that situation?
Greg or Kevin?
Yeah. I can talk about part of it. it comes down to Child Find. Our teachers are the experts that know their kids. And when we're watching and learning and working with our kids and then going through our problem solving teams, having discussions about students, talking to our counselors, engaging our special education administrators, and that we are still working through and doing evaluations. We still are going through our typical processes for special education referrals, as well as students who may need assistance with 504 and those types of things as well. In fact, some of our evaluation and some of those processes will be moving to in-person and some supports with that. So you're right. It's always actually virtual is probably more pressure on it because we may not be able to see the behaviors physically as much, especially when it comes to more of the I don't know, the nuances of student behavior in the virtual sense versus in person. However, I think our teachers are still seeing things. They're still asking questions. They're still working with families, calling home and engaging our teams along the process that we should be doing. So I feel that we're doing a significantly, I think we're doing the job well. But when kids do return back into school, and we're looking at, if approved tonight, looking at that K through 8 in the pre-K area, we've also had training for our teachers on trauma-informed care and COVID specifically, and how to work with families, because we also know as students are going to return to school that there may be some behaviors that are going to be shown in person because they have been outside of school for over 6 months. And how are those going to manifest in the classroom? How do we mitigate those things and get the resources we need for our kids?
And on the non-IEP or 504 side, just students with academic needs, Debbie, we're continuing with our assessment plan that's allowing us to continue assessing and doing, for example, you mentioned dyslexia. We're still doing our screenings for dyslexia, even while students are virtual. You mentioned earlier that you participated in a class where they were learning to write. Well, our kids are still learning to read. And so we're still continuing with many of those assessments and identifying those students. And then when we do identify a learning need, like Dr. Matheson said, on the other side, we also are engaging in a problem-solving process with our teachers, our principals, our counselors, everybody who's involved, to figure out what the best supports are going to be targeted for that particular student.
I had a thought as Debbie was asking that question, and this question's to Robin. If we come back with K through 8, are we going to be able to take on vision and hearing screening of our K through 8 kids?
So we've made the decision not to do the mass screenings like we normally do this year, just because that's that puts kids in a socially close place. But we will still be doing the vision and hearing screening for multidisciplinary evaluations, or certainly if a kid has a concern about hearing or vision. Well, a group of our school nurses are actually working on a project right now. They are doing, well, all school nurses, 2 school nurses created the project, but all school nurses are doing color vision screening right now in the virtual environment. So they've reached out to parents, and they have an online tool that they're using. And then they've developed a strategy sheet for teachers and students on things that they can do in the virtual environment to compensate for color vision deficiencies. I didn't even know that was something that would really be an issue in the virtual environment, but it is. So yeah, we're doing screening, but in a different way.
And speaking of screens, do we have any concerns with the amount of time that kids are spending on screens? I mean, I know we hear about them, having too much screen time, just when they're in normal school, and now we're asking them to be on screens even more. So I didn't know if we'd had any of those discussions. Or
I think Kevin can respond to that.
Yeah, we're certainly sensitive to screen times, and obviously it's a very difficult balance while we're in distance learning, because we want to still make sure that our children get a really high quality education, that they get live learning with their teachers, but that we also are attentive to that. So we continue to work with our teachers at all levels, just about how much time they're spending in whole group instruction, where students have to be on the screen, and then giving them activities to do away from the screen so that they can have those breaks and do additional pieces. It's also why our distance learning times are typically shorter than the regular school day would be. They're not a full 6.5-hour day at any level. And that's really because we need to be attentive to not having our our students stare at a screen all day. I know those of us who've all been working from home have had some of those days where you end up staring at the screen for like 6, 7, 8 hours, and we all know, you know that feeling. It is brutal, and we don't want to continue to expose our children to that. So we do have lesser amounts of screen time. I'll tell you, Jeff, it's still, like I said, a really difficult balance. I will tell you that, if we're going to provide our children with live instruction, and we're going to make sure that they have a teacher who's with them and providing mini lessons and doing all of that kind of stuff, we can't do that in distance learning without screen time. At the same time, like I said, we're continuing to work with our teachers to try to give students activities off the screen and things that they can do separately, building in breaks throughout the day, having a little more time between classes, those sorts of things are all really important while we're in distance learning. So something we're paying attention to, but be honest, it's just a difficult balance if we want to make sure that we're still providing kids with a really quality experience.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I actually noticed that in a couple of the classes that I've been able to sit in, where, there was 10, 15 minutes of instruction, and then kids went to breakout rooms. And I actually went to some of the breakout rooms with the teacher, and the students weren't doing anything on the screen. They were turned over here and doing something, writing something on their desk for 10 or 15 minutes. So it does seem like we've had a good balance as far as that goes.
And as we enter hour 5 of this meeting, I sort of understand what you're talking about with screen time.
I'm not in hour 5 yet. Any other big questions?
I just want to say thank you. I know the board has pushed administration to try to come up with a better plan for high school. And I think we're making some headway here. I guess, we'll see what happens. And but I want to thank you for your time. And so, Robin, I would be remiss if I didn't ask this one question. Some of the teachers brought up the air systems in the schools, and what's your thought on this matter with, some of the school, the rooms don't have windows that they can open, and I know that our facilities department is taking efforts to improve the flow of outdoor air coming into the classrooms. How concerned are you? Are there further improvements that you think that we should be making in our facilities?
I think I should let Patty talk about exactly what facilities is doing. I know they've been doing an audit of all of the HVAC systems. Patty, do you want to address that at all?
Sure. And I know we have presented to Debbie and to President Todd at the Tuesday morning meeting with the list of everything that they've done with changing the filters, updating them, us reaching out to other school districts, not only locally, but just even over the weekend. Both Ralph and I attended a conference with RTM, so reaching out to school districts nationwide, and many of them are doing exactly what we are doing. And one of the concerns that everyone has with, I know you had brought up the M13 or the MERV 13 filters, and currently we use MERV 8 filters in most of our buildings, not all, but most. Some of their concern with that is the restrictive airflow with those filters, and not necessarily proof that it would actually trap the COVID particles as well. So I know one of the things that Ralph and his team have spoke about is that possibly looking into the larger areas, perhaps in trialing out like a gym or cafeteria and inputting those filters where they're able to, at least on a trial basis, to see if it impedes the airflow. We also know that our neighboring school districts, both in St. Charles County and Jefferson County, have been operating without those type of filters and such, and have had relatively low occurrence of transmission.
thank you. I know that's been on the mind of a lot of people, so I appreciate the public conversation on it.
One other thing, I know you had mentioned opening windows to increase airflow. The one thing that our systems are doing is they are set up, they've been kind of recalibrated, if you will, to bring in additional outside air. So in lieu of opening up windows, there's some of our schools that don't have windows to open up, and some of our classrooms and or offices, like Robin's in an office currently, Kevin's in a conference room currently, there are no windows that could be opened. So we are bringing in more outside air for that, and we're keeping the systems on for a longer schedule. So instead of just having the occupied time, it's being extended by 2 hours on each side.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts on that.
All right, any other questions? Okay, Dr. Marty has shared a summary of his recommendation with me, and so I will, I'll ask for a motion, and I'll read the summary that was provided. May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approve the superintendent's recommendation for in-person and virtual teaching and learning beginning at the start of the second quarter of the 2020-2021 school year. Number one, our Parkway Pre-K program will resume full in-person instruction with smaller class sizes, as well as a virtual option beginning on October 27th, 2020. Two, our K-8 grade students will return beginning on October 27th, 2020 for 2 weeks of blended instruction for transition purposes before resuming a full 5-day in-person schedule on November 9th, 2020. There will also be a virtual campus option for students and families. And three, due to the continued higher COVID impact on older students, high school students will continue learning online, and Parkway will pursue in-person targeted support and interventions for students with specific identified needs.
So moved.
I have a second.
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 Nikki, would you please call roll?
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Hill?
Yes.
Mrs. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Schindler?
Yes.
Dr. Ciartino?
Yes.
Mr. Seltzer?
Yes.
Mr. Todd?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. We have no policy review tonight. We have no reports. We have no work session. And so now, let's see, where are we? May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education call for a special meeting / closed session on Monday, October 5th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. This meeting will be virtual.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next anticipated closed session will be held on October 5th, 2020. Details of the closed session will be posted within 24 hours of the anticipated meeting. Next, we have a motion and a second to adjourn the regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you all very much for your attendance and participation tonight. We genuinely appreciate all the support and information, and thanks to those of you who hung in virtually watching. We hope we got a lot of your questions answered, and the board will continue to be available at your pleasure. So